Hey guys, Penguin Recordings here, and today we're going to be benchmarking the latest AAA title to hit Linux, and that is Saints Row 4, brought to us by Virtual Programming and Deep Silver. So I have to note two things first before we go into the benchmark. First is that I'm using the absolute latest Nvidia drivers, and they are Nvidia 3.4.6 on Windows and 3.5.8 on Ubuntu. The last thing to note is that this is not a frame-by-frame comparison because there's no benchmark mode in the game. So instead I'm running a similar sequence each time. So let's go ahead and see the results. So at the Ultra preset at 1920 by 1080p, we are seeing an average of about 30 frames per second. When we bring it down to the High preset, we are seeing still about a 31 frames per second difference on average. Now when we bring it down to the Medium preset, we do see that average gap increase slightly to about 34 frames per second, but we're still maintaining the 30 region here. Bringing it down to Low, however, we reduce the gap to an average of about 23 frames per second at any given time. So what happens if we were to reduce the resolution down to 720p? Well, the gap does decrease and it goes only to about a difference of 16 frames per second on average, which is interesting. This is probably the first title where a reduction in resolution has improved the performance on my system. Still, the performance does trail behind the Windows version, as we can see here. On the left side is Ubuntu 15.10 and on the right side is the Windows 10. And we are seeing about a 30 frames per second difference at any given time, give or take an additional few frames here and there. This is a higher view. This was not part of the benchmark. This is just to showcase the level of detail and work here and what you can see. So it does seem to be consistent so far. Alright, there we have it. So as can be seen, there is a performance loss. On average, we are seeing about a 30 to 34 frames per second difference with this GTX 680. So an interesting thing to note is that when we bring the resolution down to 720p, we close the gap of the frame rate. So it's interesting to see that because most of the titles previously that I've benchmarked, when I bring the resolution down, we don't actually gain frames. We usually lose them or we trail significantly behind Windows. This time, it seems that we gain frame rates that bring us closer to the Windows version, but still, we're not there yet. So in addition to these benchmark numbers, there's also a couple of things that I'd like to note about this port, and that is that the Windows saves are interchangeable with the Linux saves. So you can save on Linux, go to Windows, save on Windows, go back to Linux, and you'll be totally fine. They work just great. All your saves will be there. The graphical settings also are exactly the same on both platforms, which was really nice to see. Of course, there's a possibility that you'll see different anti-aliasing options depending on the driver and card you use. For example, Jake JW saw 31 times MSAA. That's pretty surprising. This all depends on what the driver exposes to the game.
For some reason, you can go all the way to 31. Look at that. That's 31 times MSAA. I've never seen that before. One
thing that irked me with this port so far is that every time I run at super speed, I generally seem to hit some sort of invisible wall, as I'll show you here. And it can get quite frustrating, especially if you're doing some sort of time challenge. I hope they fix that soon, because that's definitely an annoying bug that I never experienced before in this game. But it's possible that the console players have experienced this issue before. As I stated, when the big boss units fall through the buildings, there are 360 players who let me know that they experienced this as well on the console version. Lastly, there doesn't seem to be any crashing or system hangs compared to VP's previous port, which was Bioshock Infinite, which hanged my system a lot. Thankfully, this one doesn't do that. The only sad thing would be that for AMD users, the performance is practically abysmal. So that's it for this benchmark video. I hope it will help you decide on whether or not you want to get the title, whether or not it will work well in your system. That's it for this benchmark. Let me know if I've done any mistakes in the comments down below. I always welcome it, and thank you for watching.